Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to the Empowered Educator. Hopefully, you had an amazing week this week. I am playing with this camera, so sorry about that. I am excited to share that I am officially a Gigi. Yes, my daughter had her baby last week. It's been a whirlwind. I'm telling you, labor and delivery, woo. I hadn't had, my daughter's going to be 36 in August, so I hadn't really had an experience for the last almost 36 years in that realm. And wow, especially when it's your kid. I don't know how many of you that listen are parents, but I always just want to protect my girl so much. And anywho, it is just a blessing to have little Sophia Lynn as my granddaughter. She is perfect. Um, yeah, she is, I have to say. So, having said all that, I'm back. I'm here. This episode's dropping a little bit late, but still, you're going to get great information because also some great things have been going on in the whole education world this week for me as well, and hopefully for you too. I have been thinking about this whole concept of culture in buildings this month. And one of the things that I think is very important for us to think about, especially as a former school leader, and I know many of you listening are teachers, but this can apply to teacher roles too. Your culture is this is how we do things here, right? And whether it's a positive or negative, it's going to affect everything else that you do. As a matter of fact, I have a coaching call with a client or a potential client this afternoon. Um, and I know that that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about because she's struggling with some things. And I think the underlying cause is really the culture in the building has been one way for so many years. She's newer in the role, and it takes a lot to make change. But having said all that, culture drives everything. And as a classroom teacher or a school leader, if you're building this culture of a fixed mindset or we're stuck, we're not going to get any better versus a growth mindset where we can really think about how we can build and grow our capacity. I think that that's what really makes a difference in the building when you can embrace that. I also talked about this week on the blog how it's easy to manage compliance. It's either a yes or no. You can have a checklist. Sherry Dixon turned her lesson plans in or didn't. Sherry Dixon was on time to work or wasn't. Sherry Dixon came to school every day this week or didn't. However, instructional capacity, teacher capacity, student capacity is a whole different story. That's when your leadership skills have to come on board. And I've heard a lot of people say recently that they feel all they're doing is disciplining children. That makes me think managing, if it's not done correctly, anywho, rather than capacity building and empowering. So, something I'm really, really thinking about this week and wanted to take it to the classroom level with all of y'all today. Now, clearly, I believe that as a teacher, you should have options for where you can grow and develop your skills. The Uncommon platform definitely is my first choice because as I was talking to a friend over the weekend, I wish this was available to me when I was in the classroom as a teacher. I didn't have a lot of extra money. I couldn't just spend a lot of time away from home because I had my daughter. She was in kindergarten and elementary grades as I was in the classroom, and she needed her mom to be there. And as a matter of fact, even going back to get my master's after she went to middle school was a struggle, not financially because I got a program that was paid for, but to spend the time to go to class, but to spend the time to do the homework and all of the things, right? Don't get me wrong, I learned a lot. I learned a lot across my entire career once I was able to start to be seen as a valued person within the school community because then I could go to conferences and things. But then you have to choose too. If you have little children at home, do you really want to be away at a conference? you know? So the Uncommon platform was designed to be able to still give high quality professional development sessions that are not going to take you all day. They're not going to take you 2 years to do. They have actionable steps and it's affordable. You can get in for $30 a month and have access to as many things as you need, in addition to being able to complete a little survey that I review, analyze, and be able to give you a very solid plan for where to go next. So building teacher capacity is like priority one to me. If you read this week's blog, you'll see that I talk about, as a school leader, you have to differentiate for teachers just like you do for students. Some teachers are going to need everything, some teachers not so much. And the platform really does that as well. But today I wanted to focus a little more with y'all and talk about, how do we build student capacity? I saw a post on LinkedIn just minutes ago before I came in here to record, and it was talking about comparing a teacher to a coach, meaning a sports coach, and how a coach can get such better results with some of our most challenging kids than some of our teachers do. And started to talk about how students sign up for the sport. I played basketball in middle school and high school. I chose to play basketball. I chose to go to those practices. They were grueling. I came home starving, exhausted, still had to do homework to do. I chose to get all of it done, and then I would just knock out because I would be so tired. So I didn't have a lot of times for my family and my friends, right? But it was a choice that I was making. But I didn't get to choose to go to school or to be in a certain teacher's class. Those were options chosen for me. I loved school. I wanted to be a teacher, and I was a good student. But I think about my classmates that were not. They didn't choose to be in my class either. And I remember thinking, the teacher doesn't like them. Coaches have this power over students because students want to get better at that thing. They want to build their capacity. They don't just go to practice to be compliant. If you think about it, if the coach said run 2 laps, okay, that's the minimum, right? Okay, I ran my 2 laps. I'm not going to do anything else for the rest of practice. That's not going to go right. That's not going to go well. But then I think about us as teachers in the classroom, and I'm guilty of it as well. I had students that did the bare minimum. I would always step back and think, why? And of course, there are several different whys, right? But if it was a student that was capable, what was the underlying why? When I started this school year and I started coaching the group of teachers I coach, they are middle school ELA teachers. We know that language arts is a difficult subject, right? Because you have to read and write. And the reading part isn't always quite the problem, but the writing can be challenging, especially the level that our students have to write. And so I sat down with each of my teachers individually, and we did a little analysis of the students in their classroom about 8 weeks into the school year. And I put a quadrant up on the board and I said, okay, this is your high skill, high will. This is your low skill, high will. This is your low skill, low will. And this is your high skill, low will. And so we listed students out, right? We did this for a purpose because we talked about what's the difference between low skill, low will and high skill, high will, and all the skill will versus, right? And then we talked about what could we do for each of those groups? If you have a high will, high skill, those are your kids that you can push. You should be challenging them. You should be offering them differentiation in a manner that keeps them engaged and not get them bored. And then, of course, we know low skill, but high will. These are kids that are motivated to learn. They just don't have the skill yet. Give them the intervention. Give them the support they need so that their skills can get better and then they can become great students. And then you have your low skill, low will. And usually these are kids that they don't have the skills and they know it and they're embarrassed and they don't know how to help themselves. These are the kids that we have to not just teach, but we have to motivate. We have to care about. We have to build relationships with. Not that we don't build relationships with everyone, but these are crucial kids. But in my opinion, the most frustrating group is your high skill, low will. They can do the work, but they don't want to. And those are the kids I'm talking about. Go out for a sport and excel. And the coaches say, I never have a problem with them. And you, as a classroom teacher, you're saying, whoa, 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 whoa. How can that be? So, how do we deal with students that they go to a coach and they do great? They have the skills to be amazing in your class, but they do not have the will. How do we build that capacity in these kids? The first thing I think, and I mentioned it, it's a relationship. If you step back and think about kids, so if you do this exercise, which I highly recommend that you do, these are going to be kids that you don't have a great relationship with. They're not motivated to work in your classroom. They probably get in trouble. They probably do the bare minimum, and you could be very frustrated with them. So the relationship is definitely not a, hey, I'm so glad you're here today, right? It's a, ooh, you're here and I don't really know what to do with you. Build the relationship that you want to see with these kids. It's going to not be easy, but it definitely will be worth it. Because if they start to see that you care, they start to feel connected to the classroom, will they engage more? In addition to building that relationship and connecting to you and the class itself, the environment, you really have to provide them a why. Why do you need to learn or do this work? Sometimes these high skill, low will kids are extremely bored. They already know what you're teaching. They've hit their ceiling when it comes to skill set in your classroom. So what would be the purpose of doing more? Especially if you've not mastered the fact of differentiation. Because those high skill, high will, they're going to love you even if they're bored, right? They just love school. They're going to do their thing. I was one of those. But those high skill, low wills, they're going to find no purpose in the work that you're doing. And these are the kids that are growing up and going out in the world saying school did me wrong. Because they're smart enough to know that. And they couldn't connect and they couldn't build their skills and they're bored. And so it's a waste of time. And then finally, I think that, especially in elementary, but I think you can do this pretty well in middle school as well, they need to see that they are valued. They have skills. Let them be peer buddies. Let them be somebody that feels you trust them with supporting other students if that's what they want to do, or trust them to do independent work. I remember I moved middle schools as a seventh grader, and I was very angry about it. I was moving from a school I had grown up in. So I went to the elementary through fifth, and then the middle school was connected, stayed with all of my friends. I felt good about school. And of course, seventh grade, everybody's angry. right? So seventh grade, we move into an area where the school was a little more affluent than the one I had grown up in. And I didn't know any of the kids, except for a couple from my church, but they were not nice kids. They were pretty, in my opinion, snooty and snobby and rich and looked down on people like us. And I went in at the end of sixth grade for my end of the year assessments. And again, I was typically a high skill, high will, but just going through a challenging time. And I didn't want to take my assessments. So I drew pictures with the bubbles on the Scantron. For those of you young, you might not remember Scantron, but they were real back in the day. And so my reading score came out really low. And they put me in the class with all the students with IEPs. And I could read and write. I was reading when I was almost 4. So, I mean, there was no reason for me to be in that class, but because of my test score, that's how they categorized us. But I went to math class and my teacher said, I don't really understand what's going on. Your elementary records show that you are a very strong math student, but last year your scores on your assessment look horrible. And I don't know, I felt, I guess, a connection with her because she was real with me. And I said, well, I'm going to be honest with you. I didn't want to take the test. So I just drew pictures. I was angry at my parents and blah, blah, blah. And she said, yeah, this is not you. She said, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to give you independent study. You don't need me except for as someone to check in, and you can soar. We went through the whole schmeal of how it would work, and she met with my parents and all of the things. I learned so much that year in math that I never even thought I could do some of that work. I went back to being a high will, high skill kid. And she made a difference for me because she trusted me to be able to do that kind of work. Now, sure, there were times where, okay, we're all taking this assessment because it's a state assessment or whatever it is. But for the most part, I went to her when I needed her. And it was kind of an interesting experience because she would actually say the words, how are you? How are things going? You're not sitting in my class every day. So, catch me up on life. Little pieces like that make such a huge difference for kids that are high skill, low will, because you don't know what the background is as well. And just having a relationship with you, that's great. Just being able to figure out how to connect to the work and why it's important, that's great. But then knowing that history about kids and digging into their background and knowing maybe it's not something about school, maybe it's something deeper. Put all that together, and that's when you can really build capacity in your students. Yeah, I think it's an amazing thing. And, I say again, I'm always about how do we do this hard better? And this is one of those things because it's hard teaching children. It's not just about the lesson plan, right? We all know that. But when you have these skill sets that you can really dig deeper and reflect on the work that you do and treat our kids like humans, especially, then that's what's going to make the difference. So hopefully you got a little bit out of this week's episode. It's the last week of February, as I said. Go make big things happen before we get into March, almost to spring break. And I'll see y'all next week back here on The Empowered Educator.